The alarm klaxons were screaming again, which meant either the coffee maker and the galley had finally given up or they were about to die in the cold vacuum of space. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell really hoped it was the coffee maker, but the way the deck plating vibrated under her boots suggested otherwise. "Mitchell, get those communications arrays back online." Commander Hayes shouted over the din of exploding consoles and the distinctive whine of failing shield generators. "We need to warn the fleet about their new weapon systems." Sarah's fingers flew over her tactical display, trying to route power around the damaged sections of the UES Defiance while plasma bolts from the Zephyrian assault ships lit up the viewports like a deadly fireworks show. 3 years into humanity's first interstellar war, she'd gotten disturbingly good at emergency repairs under fire. "Shields down to 15%, reported Lieutenant Chen from the engineering station. "Hull breaches on decks 4 through 6, and the quantum drive is showing critical failures across all primary systems." Sarah managed to restore partial communications just in time to hear the chatter from other human vessels in the fleet, and none of it was good news. The Zephyrians had unveiled some kind of new energy weapon that could slice through their best defensive screens like tissue paper, and ship after ship was reporting catastrophic damage. "This is Captain Rodriguez aboard the Valiant," crackled through the comm system. "We're losing main power and life support. Requesting immediate evacuation assistance." Sarah's stomach dropped as she watched the Valiant's icon disappear from her tactical display. That was 3 ships they'd lost in the last 10 minutes, with no apparent damage to the enemy fleet. The sleek, organic-looking Zephyrian vessels moved through space with predatory grace, their hulls shimmering with some kind of adaptive camouflage that made targeting solutions nearly impossible. "Commander, I'm reading massive power signatures from the enemy flagship," Sarah reported, trying to keep the panic out of her voice. "Whatever they're charging up, it's bigger than anything we've seen before." The Defiance shuddered as another plasma salvo hammered their failing shields, and Sarah watched her console readings spike into the red. Emergency lighting flickered throughout the bridge as non-essential systems shut down automatically, leaving them running on backup power and determination. "All hands, prepare for ramming speed," Commander Hayes announced with the kind of calm authority that had made him legendary among the fleet. "If we're going down, we're taking as many of them with us as we can." Sarah's hands moved to comply with the order, but before she could engage the collision course, a brilliant white light flooded the bridge. When her vision cleared, she found herself staring at the impossible sight of Zephyrian soldiers materializing out of thin air on their bridge, their forms solidifying from streams of silver energy. The soldiers were humanoid but distinctly alien, their skin holding a metallic sheen that shifted between silver and pale gold depending on the lighting. Their eyes were the most unsettling feature, large and expressive, with irises that seemed to shift through the spectrum from deep violet to brilliant amber. They wore form-fitting armor that looked grown rather than manufactured, and their weapons hummed with contained energy. "Surrender your vessel," the lead soldier commanded in perfect English, though his voice carried harmonics that suggested vocal cords designed for a different atmosphere. "Resistance will result in immediate termination." Commander Hayes reached for his sidearm, but Sarah caught his wrist. She'd spent 3 years studying Zephyrian tactics, and she knew that their teleportation technology meant resistance was pointless. They were already dead, the only question was whether they'd die quickly or slowly. "Stand down," Hayes ordered reluctantly, raising his hands. "All crew, comply with their instructions." The next few hours passed in a blur of surrender procedures and transport to the Zephyrian flagship. Sarah found herself separated from her crewmates and locked in what could only be described as a crystalline cell, its walls pulsing with soft bioluminescent patterns that seemed to respond to her heartbeat. The cell was surprisingly comfortable, with what appeared to be a bed that had grown from the floor and a small alcove that provided water and some kind of nutrient paste that actually tasted better than military rations. Sarah was beginning to wonder if she was being fattened for some alien ritual when the cell walls simply dissolved, revealing a figure that made her question everything she thought she knew about the enemy. The woman who entered was unmistakably Zephyrian, with the characteristic metallic skin tone and shifting eyes, but she moved with a grace that spoke of royal bearing rather than military training. Her hair was long and silver white, braided with what appeared to be living crystals that caught and refracted the cell's ambient light. Most striking were her eyes, which had settled into a deep violet that seemed to hold centuries of sadness. "Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell," the woman said, her English flawless but carrying an accent that sounded like wine through crystal formations. "I am Princess Zara Velthyss of the Zephyrian Empire. I have a proposition for you." Sarah stood slowly, her military training warring with curiosity. "If you're here to interrogate me, Your Highness, I should warn you that I know very little about fleet operations beyond my communications duties." The princess smiled, an expression that transformed her austere features into something almost warm. "I am not here for military intelligence, Lieutenant. I am here because I believe you and I might be the key to ending this war that has consumed both our peoples." "I'm listening," Sarah said carefully. Princess Zara moved to the center of the cell, her hands clasped behind her back in a gesture that reminded Sarah oddly of her own academy instructors. "For 3 years, we have fought each other across dozens of star systems. Millions have died on both sides, entire worlds have been devastated, and for what? Because our species met under unfortunate circumstances and chose conflict over communication. Your people attacked our colonies without provocation," Sarah pointed out. "And your people were expanding into territories that we considered sacred," Zara replied. "Both sides believed they were defending themselves against an aggressive alien threat. But I have spent years studying your culture, your language, your history. Humans and Zephyrians are not so different, Sarah Mitchell. We both value honor, we both love our families, and we both dream of peace among the stars." Sarah studied the princess's face, looking for signs of deception but finding only earnest conviction. "What kind of proposition are you talking about?" Zara's eyes shifted from violet to a warm amber, which Sarah was beginning to suspect indicated emotional intensity. "Marry me, Lieutenant. Bond with me in ceremony that both our peoples will recognize as legitimate. Become my partner in forging a peace that can end this senseless war." Sarah blinked, certain she'd misheard. "I'm sorry, did you just propose to me?" "In the most literal sense, yes." Zara's expression grew more serious. "In Zephyrian culture, a royal marriage bond represents the unification of opposing forces. If you accept my proposal, it will force both our governments to the negotiating table and provide a framework for lasting peace. And if I refuse?" The princess's eyes shifted back to violet, and for the first time, Sarah saw the weight of command in her bearing. "Then this war continues until one of our species is extinct, and I suspect it will be mutual destruction rather than victory for either side." Sarah stared at Princess Zara for a long moment, trying to process the surreal situation. "Let me get this straight. You want to end an interstellar war by marrying a human communications officer you've known for approximately 10 minutes? 15 minutes, Zara corrected with what might have been humor. "And the duration of our acquaintance is less important than the symbolic weight of the union. In Zephyrian tradition, royal marriages have ended conflicts that lasted generations. But I'm not royalty. I'm barely middle management in the military hierarchy." Zara moved to what Sarah assumed was the cell's version of a window, though it showed a view of space that seemed more artistic than practical. "That is precisely why this could work. You represent the common soldiers who have borne the cost of this war, while I represent the royal authority to make binding agreements. Together, we bridge not just our species, but our social structures." Sarah sat down on the grown bed, her mind racing through the implications. "Assuming I were even considering this insane proposal, what would it actually involve? Are we talking about a political marriage or?" She gestured vaguely. "The bond ceremony creates a psychic connection between partners," Zara explained, her eyes shifting to a soft gold that Sarah was learning indicated careful thought. "We would share emotions, thoughts to some degree, and an unbreakable commitment to each other's well-being. It is not merely political theater." "You're talking about mind reading?" "More like emotional resonance. I would know when you are in danger or distress, and you would sense the same from me. The bond ensures that neither partner can betray the other without experiencing the consequences directly. Sarah rubbed her temples, feeling the beginning of what promised to be a spectacular headache. This gets more complicated by the minute. What about your own people? Surely there are those who would oppose a union with a human. Zara's expression darkened, her eyes shifting to deep violet. My brother, General Kale, leads the military faction that views humans as a plague to be eradicated. He believes that showing mercy is weakness, and that only complete domination will secure our empire's future. There are others who share his view. And the ones who don't. Councillor Thane and the diplomatic faction have long argued that this war serves no one's interests. They believe, as I do, that our species have more to gain as allies than as enemies. Zara turned back to Sarah, her gaze intense. The question is whether you have the courage to help me prove them right. The cell's walls suddenly became transparent, revealing the vast interior of the Zephyrian flagship. Sarah could see other human prisoners in nearby cells, including several of her crewmates from the Defiance. More troubling was the sight of massive weapons systems being prepared in the ship's primary bays, their energy signatures unlike anything in human arsenals. Those weapons could sterilize entire planets, Zara said quietly. My brother intends to use them on your core worlds within the next solar cycle unless your government agrees to unconditional surrender. And you think a wedding is going to stop him? I think a wedding might give the peace faction enough political leverage to prevent genocide. Zara's voice carried a weight of desperate hope. The bond ceremony must be witnessed by representatives of both species to be legitimate. It would force your leaders and mine to the same table, creating an opportunity for actual negotiation instead of ultimatums. Sarah stood and began pacing the small cell, her tactical training kicking in automatically. What are the logistics? How do we even contact my superiors? How do we ensure safe passage for diplomats? How do we prevent this from being seen as collaboration with the enemy? You are considering it, Zara observed, and Sarah caught the note of surprise in her voice. I'm analyzing it, Sarah corrected. That's what I do. I look at impossible communication problems and find solutions. She stopped pacing and faced the princess directly. But I need to understand the cultural significance from your perspective. What does marriage mean to your people? Zara's eyes brightened to warm amber, and she moved closer. Among the Zephyrians, the marriage bond is sacred because it represents the joining of complementary strengths. We believe that no individual, no matter how capable, can achieve their full potential alone. The bond ceremony creates a partnership where each member's abilities are enhanced by their connection to the other. That sounds beautiful in theory, but what about practical considerations? Where would we live? What language would we speak? What happens when cultural differences create conflicts? Those are exactly the questions that diplomats from both sides would need to negotiate, Zara replied with growing excitement. Don't you see? By facing these challenges ourselves, we create a template for broader cooperation between our peoples. The sound of footsteps in the corridor outside made both women turn toward the cell's entrance. Heavy boots, multiple individuals, and the distinctive harmonic hum of Zephyrian military equipment powering up. My brother, Zara whispered, her eyes darkening to deep purple. He has discovered our conversation. The cell wall dissolved again, revealing General Kale Velthys flanked by 6 armed guards. The family resemblance was obvious, but where Zara radiated diplomatic grace, Kale projected barely contained violence. His armor was battle-scarred, his weapons well-used, and his eyes held the cold calculation of a career soldier. Sister, he said in accented English, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made Sarah's military instinct snap to attention despite herself. I had hoped the reports were incorrect, but here I find you fraternizing with the enemy in direct violation of imperial decree. I am negotiating an end to a war that has already cost us too much, Zara replied, moving to place herself between Kale and Sarah. The human governments will never accept unconditional surrender, and our weapons, however powerful, cannot hold an empire spanning dozens of systems. They will accept surrender when their homeworld is reduced to radioactive ash, Kale snarled. You speak of costs, but refuse to acknowledge the cost of appearing weak before inferior beings. Sarah felt her temper flare at the casual dehumanization. With respect, General, for inferior beings, we've given your superior forces quite a fight for 3 years running. Kale's eyes fixed on her with predatory intensity. The human speaks without permission in the presence of royalty. Perhaps we should demonstrate the consequences of such insolence. She speaks because I invited her to, Zara interjected firmly. And her tactical assessments are more accurate than your emotional rhetoric. We are not winning this war, Kale. We are bleeding resources and ships while the humans adapt and improve their defenses. Then we escalate until adaptation becomes irrelevant. The siblings faced each other in what was clearly a long-standing ideological conflict, and Sarah realized she was witnessing the fundamental divide that would determine the fate of both species. The cells seemed to grow smaller as the tension mounted, and she found herself wondering if her next words would start a diplomatic revolution or get her shot by an angry alien general. The confrontation between the royal siblings was interrupted by the arrival of an elderly Zephyrian whose presence commanded immediate respect from everyone present, including General Kale. Counselor Thane moved with the careful dignity of advanced age, his metallic skin bearing intricate patterns that seemed to shift and flow like living tattoos. Your Highness, General, he said formally, though his eyes held a warmth that suggested genuine affection for both siblings. The High Council has been informed of this unusual diplomatic initiative. We require Princess Zara and the human representative to address the full assembly. Kale's jaw tightened. The Council has no authority over military operations, Counselor. But it has absolute authority over matters of royal succession and marriage bonds, Thane replied mildly. Unless, of course, the General wishes to challenge thousand-year-old imperial law. Sarah watched the exchange with fascination, recognizing the careful political maneuvering that transcended species barriers. Thane was obviously using legal technicalities to outflank Kale's military authority, while the general searched for counterarguments that wouldn't undermine his own position. The High Council chamber has been prepared for holographic transmission to human command authorities, Thane continued. Both governments will witness the proceedings simultaneously, ensuring transparency and legitimacy. You contacted my superiors without authorization? Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure if she was relieved or terrified. Your Admiral Foster has been remarkably cooperative, Thane said with what might have been amusement. It seems that news of potential diplomatic solutions spreads quickly when the alternative is planetary bombardment. An hour later, Sarah found herself standing in the most impressive room she'd ever seen, facing beings whose decisions would determine the fate of billions. The High Council chamber was a sphere of living crystal that seemed to extend infinitely in all directions, with council members seated on platforms that floated at various levels throughout the space. Holographic displays showed human military leaders on one side and Zephyrian officials on the other, creating a three-way conference that represented more concentrated political power than Sarah had ever imagined being exposed to. Admiral Foster looked haggard but determined, while the Zephyrian Emperor, Zara's father, observed everything with eyes that seemed to catalog every detail for future analysis. Lieutenant Mitchell, Admiral Foster's image spoke first, are you speaking under duress? Do you require immediate extraction? No sir, Sarah replied, her voice steadier than she felt. I'm here voluntarily to explore a diplomatic solution that could end this conflict. Counselor Thane gestured, and the chamber's acoustics somehow amplified his voice to reach every corner of the vast space. The princess has proposed a marriage bond with the human representative, creating a formal alliance between our species. This assembly will determine the legitimacy of such a union. The debate that followed revealed the deep fractures within Zephyrian society. Military commanders argued that showing mercy would be interpreted as weakness, while diplomats countered that continued escalation would lead to mutual annihilation. Sarah found herself defending not just humanity, but the very concept that different species could coexist peacefully. The humans have demonstrated remarkable adaptability, she argued when given the opportunity to speak. In 3 years of conflict, they've evolved from basic chemical rockets to quantum drives, from kinetic weapons to energy shields. Underestimating our capacity for growth and innovation has been your military's consistent error. General Kale rose from his platform, his armor catching the chamber's ambient light. The human speaks of adaptation, yet her species remains fragmented into competing nations that cannot even achieve peace among themselves. How can they claim to offer alliance with a unified empire? Because our diversity is our strength, Sarah shot back. Different perspectives, different approaches to problems, different cultural solutions to challenges. Your empire may be unified, but has that unity made you more adaptable or more rigid? The question hit home, and Sarah could see council members exchanging glances. Zara moved to stand beside her, creating a visual symbol of interspecies cooperation. The marriage bond is not merely political theater, the princess addressed the assembly. It represents a genuine commitment to understanding each other's perspectives and finding common ground. The lieutenant and I have spent hours discussing our cultures, our fears, our hopes for the future. We have found more similarities than differences. Emperor Velthyss spoke for the first time, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in Sarah's bones. The bond ceremony requires both participants to undergo the ritual of shared truth, where deception becomes impossible. Are you prepared to open your minds completely to each other and to this assembly? Sarah felt her stomach drop. What exactly does that involve? Temporary telepathic connection facilitated by our bioneural interface technology, Zara explained quietly. All thoughts, memories, and emotions become accessible to your partner and to the ceremonial witnesses. Every thought? Sarah asked weakly. Every thought, the emperor confirmed. The marriage bond cannot be based on lies or hidden agendas. Both participants must demonstrate complete honesty and commitment. Admiral Foster's image leaned forward. Lieutenant, you are under no obligation to undergo alien psychological procedures. We can continue exploring conventional diplomatic channels. Sarah looked around the chamber, taking in the faces of beings who held the power to end or escalate a war that had already consumed too many lives. She thought of her crewmates in the crystal cells, of the destroyed ships she'd watched disappear from her tactical displays, of the weapon systems being prepared to sterilize human worlds. I accept the terms, she said firmly. But I have conditions of my own. The chamber fell silent, all attention focused on the human who had just agreed to undergo an alien ritual that could reshape interstellar relations. First, immediate cessation of hostilities during the negotiation period. Second, prisoner exchanges beginning within 24 hours. Third, establishment of neutral zones for diplomatic meetings. Fourth, joint exploration missions to demonstrate practical cooperation. General Kale's laugh was harsh. The human makes demands as if she holds a position of strength rather than being a prisoner of war. She holds the strongest position possible, Counselor Thane observed. She holds the power to choose peace or continued war. That makes her the most important person in this chamber. The Emperor raised a hand for silence. The human's conditions are acceptable as preliminary agreements. But the marriage bond, once formed, cannot be dissolved. Princess Zara, do you understand that choosing this path means binding your life to this human regardless of political consequences? Zara's eyes met Sarah's, shifting through a spectrum of colors that conveyed emotions beyond human language. I understand, Father. And I choose to move forward. Then we proceed to the trial of worthiness, the Emperor announced. Both participants must prove their commitment through deed as well as word. General Kale, you will design 3 challenges that test their ability to work together under pressure. Kale's smile was predatory. It will be my pleasure, Your Imperial Majesty. Sarah suppressed a groan. She'd just agreed to marry an alien princess, undergo telepathic examination, and face combat trials designed by a general who considered her an inferior life form. Either this was the beginning of a lasting peace between species, or she was about to die in the most spectacular fashion possible. The arena of trials was a massive spherical chamber that could reconfigure itself to simulate any environment, from the molten surface of volcanic worlds to the zero-gravity void between stars. Sarah stood beside Zara at the arena's center, watching General Kale explain the 3 challenges to the assembled witnesses from both species. The first trial tests tactical coordination, Kale announced, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic systems. You will face a simulation of the Battle of Proxima Station, where human and Zephyrian forces first clashed 3 years ago. Your objective is to find a solution that preserves both fleets. Sarah felt her palms sweating as the arena transformed around them into the bridge of a starship, complete with tactical displays and communication systems. She recognized the setup immediately. It was an almost perfect replica of a human command center, but with Zephyrian interface elements integrated seamlessly into the design. This is a no-win scenario, she murmured to Zara as they took positions at the command stations. Both sides were committed to total engagement. Neither fleet survived intact. Then we must find a third option, Zara replied, her eyes shifting to the focused gold that Sarah had learned indicated deep concentration. What if we assume communication was possible from the beginning? The simulation began with both fleets approaching Proxima Station, weapons charged and shields raised. Sarah's tactical training kicked in automatically as she assessed the force compositions and likely engagement patterns. But instead of planning attacks, she found herself thinking about what Zara had said about communication. Wait, Sarah said suddenly. What if the real enemy wasn't each other? What if something else posed a threat to both fleets? Zara's eyes brightened as she understood. The asteroid field around Proxima was unusually dense for that star system. Gravitational anomalies that could indicate a rogue singularity. Sarah finished, her fingers flying over the tactical display. If we can recalibrate the sensors to detect quantum fluctuations instead of targeting enemy ships. Working together, they identified the gravitational anomaly that would have destroyed both fleets if they hadn't been so focused on fighting each other. In the simulation, human and Zephyrian vessels worked together to escape the collapsing spacetime around the micro-black hole, turning a battle into a rescue mission. General Kale's expression was unreadable as he announced the second trial. Combat effectiveness under pressure. You will face 3 waves of holographic opponents drawn from historical battles of both species. The arena shifted into a ground combat environment, and Sarah found herself holding weapons designed for her human physiology while Zara wielded energy weapons that seemed to respond to her bioelectric field. The first wave consisted of ancient Zephyrian warriors whose fighting style emphasized fluid movement and energy projection. Cover me while I flank left, Sarah called out, falling back on her military training. Negative, Zara replied. Their energy shields are polarized. We need to attack from opposite directions simultaneously to create interference patterns. Sarah had to abandon everything she knew about small unit tactics and trust Zara's understanding of energy weapon interactions. The result was a fighting style neither species had ever developed, combining human adaptability with Zephyrian energy manipulation in ways that proved devastatingly effective. The second wave brought human historical warriors whose tactics Sarah understood instinctively, but Zara struggled with their unpredictable aggression. They fight without pattern, she gasped after barely dodging a holographic sword thrust. That's the point, Sarah explained while providing covering fire. Human combat doctrine emphasizes improvisation and individual initiative. You can't predict what we'll do because we don't always know ourselves. The third wave combined both fighting styles, creating opponents that challenged everything they'd learned. Success required not just cooperation, but genuine integration of their different approaches to problem-solving and conflict resolution. The final trial, Kale announced as the arena reconfigured once more, tests your commitment to each other above all other loyalties. You will face a choice between personal survival and your partner's welfare. The chamber became a maze of crystalline corridors with a single path leading to safety. Sarah and Zara found themselves separated by a barrier that would only permit one person to pass through. On Sarah's side, a holographic display showed human fleet positions and tactical data that could save thousands of lives if transmitted to Earth. On Zara's side, similar intelligence about Zephyrian defensive positions that could prevent a massacre of her own people. The barrier will only lower for one person, Kale's voice echoed through the maze. Choose quickly, as your time is limited before both pathways collapse. Sarah stared at the intelligence data, knowing it could end the war in humanity's favor. Then she looked at Zara, who was clearly facing the same impossible choice. The princess's eyes had shifted to deep violet, indicating emotional turmoil, but her expression was resolute. I won't choose between our peoples, Sarah called out. Nor will I, Zara replied. There has to be another solution. Working together despite the barrier between them, they analyzed the maze structure and realized it was designed with a fundamental assumption, that loyalty to one species would override personal commitment. But what if they refuse to accept that assumption? The barrier responds to bioelectric signatures, Zara observed. If we synchronize our neural patterns. Like a marriage bond would, Sarah finished. We have to trust each other completely. They placed their hands on opposite sides of the barrier and opened their minds to each other in a way that transcended the formal ritual. Sarah felt Zara's consciousness touch hers, sharing memories of loss and hope, fear and determination. In return, she offered her own experiences of war and peace, duty and compassion. The barrier dissolved, and they walked through together, leaving both sets of intelligence data behind in favor of a shared commitment to finding solutions that served both species. General Kale stood waiting at the maze's center, his expression complex. You have passed the trials, he said formally. But understand that this marriage bond will make you targets for extremists on both sides who prefer war to peace. We understand, Sarah and Zara said simultaneously, then looked at each other in surprise. The wedding ceremony itself was unlike anything in human or Zephyrian tradition, combining elements from both cultures and rituals that honored their differences while celebrating their unity. Sarah found herself wearing a gown that incorporated bioluminescent fibers from Zephyrian silkworms and traditional human lace, while Zara wore crystalline jewelry that had been crafted by human artisans using alien techniques. The vows were spoken in both languages, broadcast simultaneously to every human colony in Zephyrian world. When the marriage bond formed, Sarah felt her consciousness expand to encompass not just Zara's thoughts and emotions, but a sense of connection to every living thing in the galaxy. 6 months later, Sarah stood in a garden of new harmony, the first joint human-Zephyrian colony established in the neutral zone between their territories. Children of both species played together among flowers that bloomed in impossible colors under the light of twin suns, their laughter transcending any language barriers. No regrets? Zara asked, joining her on the observation deck overlooking the bustling colony below. Sarah smiled, feeling the warm pulse of their bond connection as Zara's presence settled beside her. Only that it took a war to bring us together. Look at them down there, human and Zephyrian engineers working side by side on the new transit system, children teaching each other games that neither species invented alone. This is what we could have had from the beginning. Perhaps, Zara mused, her eyes shifting to the contented amber that Sarah had grown to love. But without the conflict, would either of our peoples have been ready to truly listen to each other? Sometimes the greatest growth comes from the greatest challenges. A communication chime interrupted their quiet moment, and Admiral Foster's hologram materialized on the deck. Sarah, Zara, I wanted to personally thank you both for the latest intelligence report from the Andromeda expedition. The joint exploration fleet has discovered 3 potentially habitable worlds, and the cooperation between our species continues to exceed all expectations. Any word from the diplomatic corps about the trade agreements? Sarah asked. Signed and ratified by both governments last week, Foster replied with satisfaction. Zephyrian biotechnology for human manufacturing techniques, plus joint development of the new quantum communication networks. The economists are calling it the most beneficial alliance in recorded history. After the Admiral signed off, Sarah and Zara walked down into the colony proper, where the evening market was beginning to bustle with activity. Vendors from both species offered goods that represented the best of both cultures. Human creativity enhanced by Zephyrian precision, alien artistry made practical by human engineering. Commander Mitchell of LTHYSS called out Dr. Kim, the colony's chief scientist, using Sarah's new hyphenated name. The xenobiology lab results came in from the latest botanical specimens. The hybrid plants are showing remarkable adaptation to both Earth-normal and Zephyrian atmospheric conditions. Sarah felt a familiar thrill of scientific discovery. Her new role as liaison between human research institutions and Zephyrian knowledge repositories had opened up possibilities she'd never imagined during her communications officer days. Send the data to both academies. I want to see how quickly they can develop practical applications. As they made their way home through streets lit by bioluminescent Zephyrian organisms and human solar collectors, Sarah reflected on how much had changed. The woman who had been terrified of accidentally starting an interstellar incident had become someone who helped prevent them through daily acts of bridge building and understanding. Jake sent another message from Earth, Zara mentioned as they entered their shared dwelling, a structure that grew from the ground like Zephyrian architecture but incorporated human concepts of privacy and personal space. He's been promoted to head of the new hybrid technology development program. Apparently, his joke about alien dating apps inspired an actual cultural exchange network. Sarah laughed, remembering her old crewmate's irreverent sense of humor. I should have known he'd find a way to turn sarcasm into a career advancement opportunity. Their evening routine had evolved into something uniquely their own. Sharing the day's experiences through both verbal communication and the deeper emotional resonance of their bond, planning tomorrow's challenges while finding comfort in each other's presence. As they settled into their shared meditation space, Sarah felt the profound satisfaction of a life that had found its true purpose. The war that had once threatened to destroy both species had instead forged them into something stronger together than either could have been alone. And in the quiet moments before sleep, as she felt Zara's contentment mixing with her own through their permanent connection, Sarah knew that some of the best discoveries in life were the ones you never saw coming.